The soldier who spoke had eyes that didn't belong to the living. Thomas noticed it immediately. Not the uniform, not the rifle, not even the way they moved like shadows instead of men. It was their eyes. Empty. Not tired, not afraid, not hardened by war. Just empty. Like something inside them had been taken out and replaced with silence. Thomas raised his hands slowly, his fingers trembling from cold and exhaustion. "I'm Union," he said weakly. "19th Ohio. I was at Fredericksburg. I was hit. I don't know what happened. I just need—" "Silence," the soldier interrupted, not loudly, but with a tone that made Thomas obey instantly. The group tightened around him, forming a loose circle. There were 6 of them, all Union uniforms, all carrying rifles, all staring at him like he didn't belong in the world anymore. One of them stepped closer. He was older, mid-30s maybe, a sergeant, judging by the faded stripes on his sleeve. "You were processed," the sergeant said. Thomas frowned. "Processed?" A pause. Then the sergeant spoke again. "You were recorded as deceased. Your identification was logged. Your body was transferred." Thomas swallowed. "I wasn't dead." The sergeant's expression didn't change. "That is no longer relevant." A cold wave ran through Thomas's spine. "What do you mean it's not relevant? I'm standing right here." The men didn't react, didn't blink, didn't even shift their stance. It was like arguing with statues. "Where are the others?" Thomas asked, his voice cracking. "The army, where did they go?" No answer. "Where's the camp? The surgeons? The officers?" Still nothing. Then, "They moved on," one of the soldiers said quietly. Thomas turned toward him. "Moved on? What about the wounded?" The soldier's gaze flickered for just a second. "Not all of them moved on." Thomas's heart began to pound. "What is this?" he demanded. "What's going on here?" The sergeant stepped closer, now only a few feet away. Up close, Thomas could see something even more disturbing. There was no dirt on the man's uniform, no blood, no wear. It was too clean, as if it had never seen battle at all. "You should not be here," the sergeant said. "I don't even know where here is," Thomas snapped. Another pause, longer this time. Then the sergeant turned slightly, glancing at the others. A silent exchange, a decision being made. When he looked back at Thomas, something had changed. Not emotion, but intention. "Follow us." They didn't wait for an answer. They turned and began walking into the darkness beyond the abandoned battlefield. Thomas hesitated. Every instinct told him to run. But run where? There was nothing behind him but death, and whatever lay ahead, at least it was something. So he followed. The forest swallowed them quickly. Bare trees stretched upward like skeletal fingers blocking out the pale moonlight. The ground was frozen, crunching beneath their boots with every step. No one spoke, not a word. Thomas tried to count time, of distance, of direction, but it became impossible. The deeper they went, the more the world seemed to lose its shape. The air grew colder, heavier, and there was a smell. Not rot, not smoke, something else, something metallic, like iron or blood. After what felt like hours, they reached it, a structure hidden deep within the woods. At first, Thomas thought it was a ruined farmhouse, but as they got closer, he realized it was something far stranger. It was too large, too symmetrical, and the windows, there were no windows, just dark openings like empty eye sockets carved into stone. This wasn't here before," Thomas whispered. The sergeant didn't respond. They approached the entrance, a massive wooden door reinforced with iron. 2 more soldiers stood guard outside. They didn't react when the group arrived, didn't even acknowledge them, just stood there, perfectly still.
The door opened without a sound, no creak, no resistance, just opened. And inside, darkness. Thomas stepped in and immediately felt it. The air was different, warmer, but not in a comforting way, more like the warmth of a closed room that hadn't been opened in years. The smell was stronger here, that same metallic scent, thick and suffocating. The door closed behind them, and for a moment, total darkness. Then lights flickered. Not candles, not lanterns, something else. A dim, unnatural glow that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Thomas blinked, trying to adjust, and what he saw next made his blood run cold. Rows, endless rows, of bodies. Not dead, not exactly, but not alive either. They were laid out on long wooden tables, lined up in perfect order. Soldiers, Union soldiers, dozens of them, maybe more. Their eyes were closed, their chests barely moved, breathing, but shallow, too shallow. "What is this place?" Thomas whispered. No one answered. The group moved forward, deeper into the room. Thomas followed, unable to look away. Each body looked preserved, no decay, no wounds, even uniforms were intact, as if time itself had stopped for them. At the far end of the room stood a man, not a soldier. His clothes were different, cleaner, darker, more formal. He didn't turn when they approached, just stood there looking down at something on the table in front of him. "Another anomaly," the sergeant said. The man finally spoke. His voice was calm, controlled. "Alive?" "Yes." A pause. Then, "Bring him forward." Thomas felt hands on his arms, not rough, but firm, unyielding. They pushed him closer to the table, closer to the man. Slowly, the man turned, and when Thomas saw his face, everything inside him froze, because he recognized it, not from the battlefield, not from the army, but from somewhere else, somewhere deeper, somewhere impossible. "You shouldn't remember me," the man said quietly. Thomas's lips trembled. I've seen you before." The man smiled slightly. "That's not possible." Thomas shook his head. "No, I know that face." A flash, a memory, a moment from years ago. Back home, Ohio, a man visiting the town, talking to people, asking questions, watching, always watching. "You came to my farm," Thomas whispered. The man's smile faded. For the first time, there was emotion in his eyes. Not fear, not anger, but something far more dangerous. Recognition. "Interesting," the man said softly. Then he looked at the soldiers. "Prepare him." Thomas struggled. "What are you doing? What is this?" No answer. They forced him onto a table, strapped his arms down, his legs, his chest. He couldn't move, could barely breathe. The man stepped closer, holding something in his hand, a small device, strange, metallic, not like anything Thomas had ever seen. "This war," the man said, almost to himself, "is an excellent cover." Thomas's heart pounded violently. Cover for what? The man looked directly into his eyes, and this time he answered, "For finding men who can survive death." Thomas screamed, but no one came, no one heard, and as the device lowered toward his chest, the last thing he saw was the rows of silent soldiers around him, waiting, breathing, trapped, just like
The metal touched his chest, and the world vanished. Not darkness, not unconsciousness, something else. Thomas felt himself falling, but his body never moved. Sound disappeared first, then pain, then even the feeling of breath. It was as if something invisible had reached inside him and turned off the parts that made him human. And yet, he was still aware, floating, watching, trapped inside something that wasn't quite his own body anymore. Images began to appear, not dreams, memories, but not his. He saw a battlefield, but not Fredericksburg. This one was older, different uniforms, different weapons, men charging across a field under a sky filled with smoke. Then it changed. Another war, another time, then another and another. Dozens of them, hundreds of them. Men dying, men surviving, men waking up, just like he had. A voice echoed through the void, not loud, but everywhere. You are not the first. Thomas tried to speak, but he had no voice, no mouth, no body, only thought. What is this? He tried to think. The voice responded instantly. A selection. The images shifted again. Now he saw the building, the one he had been taken into, but from above, from far above, hidden in the forest like a secret buried in plain sight. Then the ground beneath it moved, opened, and Thomas saw what was really there. Not just one building, but an entire network. Tunnels, chambers, rooms filled with those silent, breathing bodies. Hundreds of them, maybe more. They are candidates, the voice said. For what? Thomas thought. For survival beyond death. Suddenly, pain, blinding, explosive. Thomas gasped as sensation slammed back into him. His eyes flew open, his chest heaving violently as air rushed into his lungs. He was back, strapped to the table, the room spinning, the man standing over him, watching, studying. Remarkable, the man murmured. Thomas struggled against the restraints, his body shaking. What did you do to me? He rasped. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned slightly, making a note on a small piece of paper. Calm, precise, as if Thomas was nothing more than an experiment. You crossed the threshold, the man said finally. Thomas's heart pounded. What threshold? The moment between life and death. Thomas swallowed hard. I was buried, alive. Yes, the man said simply. And you did not die. That doesn't make me special, Thomas snapped weakly. That makes me lucky. The man looked at him and smiled. No, he said quietly, it makes you valuable. The restraints loosened, not completely, just enough for Thomas to move his arms slightly. He didn't try to fight this time. He needed answers. What is this place? He asked. The man stepped closer. For years, he began, we have observed a pattern across wars, across continents, across time itself. Thomas stared at him. A pattern of men who refuse to die. Thomas shook his head. That's not possible. It is rare but consistent. Individuals who, under extreme conditions, cross the boundary and return. Thomas's mind raced. The visions, the voice. You've seen others? He asked. Many. Where are they? The man gestured around the room. Thomas's breath caught. No, they are here, the man said. Preserved, studied, waiting. Waiting for what? The man's eyes darkened slightly. For the next phase. Suddenly, a noise echoed from somewhere deeper in the facility, a low, distant rumble, like something heavy moving underground. Thomas turned his head instinctively. What was that? No one answered, but for the first time, the soldiers shifted, just slightly, uneasy. The man noticed, and that worried Thomas more than anything. What is it? Thomas demanded. The man hesitated, just for a second. Then, it seems, he said slowly, we are no longer the only ones observing. Another rumble, closer this time. The lights flickered. Several of the bodies on the tables twitched, just slightly, but enough. Thomas's eyes widened. Did you see that? No response, but the soldiers were no longer perfectly still. Their grips tightened on their rifles, their empty eyes now focused on the far end of the room. Then a sound, a breath, not shallow, not weak, deep, intentional. One of the bodies sat up, slowly, mechanically. Its eyes opened, and they were not empty. Thomas felt his blood turn to ice, because whatever was happening, it wasn't part of the man's plan. The man stepped back. For the first time since Thomas had seen him, there was uncertainty in his expression. "Impossible," he whispered. The soldier on the table turned his head, not toward the man, not toward the others, toward Thomas. And then it spoke, a voice dry and broken like it hadn't been used in years. "You came back." Thomas couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't barely breathe. More movement, another body, then another, eyes opening, limbs shifting, breath returning. The room was changing, the silence breaking, and whatever had been keeping those men still was no longer working. The man's voice cut through the chaos. "Secure them," he ordered sharply. The soldiers moved instantly, rifles raised, positioned, ready. But Thomas knew it was already too late, because the first soldier was already standing, and the look in his eyes wasn't confusion, wasn't fear, it was awareness. And whatever had brought him back was not human. The soldier took a step forward, chains snapped, wood cracked beneath his weight, and the lights flickered violently as a deep, unnatural sound echoed through the entire structure. Thomas felt it again, that same presence from before, that voice, but now it wasn't distant. Now it was here, inside the room, inside them. And as more bodies began to rise, Thomas realized the truth. They hadn't just been studying death. They'd awakened something far worse. And now it was awake.